Welcome to the PSGS podcast. My name is Randall Pape, and today we're speaking with Mr. Ben Fawcett. Ben Fawcett is an environmental health engineer, development manager, lecturer, researcher, and co-author of the book The Last Taboo, Opening the Door on the Global Sanitation Crisis. Ben has spent 10 years with Oxfam, Great Britain and Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Since 2007, he has been based in northern New South Wales, teaching water supply and sanitation at the International Water Centre at the University of Queensland. He also advises Engineers Without Borders and continues to campaign for toilets for those suffering the indignity of life without such a basic facility. Ben has recently been awarded the 2011 Oklahoma University International Water Prize. Thank you so much for having the time to spend with us here, Ben. I have some basic questions, and we'll try and keep it brief. So I know you would like have another engagement to get to here. Sure. First, your book is called The Last Taboo, Opening the Door on the Global Sanitation Crisis. Is the sanitation topic taboo? How was it received?
Yes, I think definitely the topic of dealing with our waste is a real problem. As you know, we can flush and forget our waste. We just don't have to deal with it. And we've been brought up with that in the West in such a way that we literally don't have to think about it. And we don't care where it goes. And huge numbers of people, 40% of the population of the world, cannot do that in any way. Only 30% of the world population have flush toilets connected to a sewer. So 70% are reliant on something else, and a huge majority of them are without any toilet of any kind, as we call it in Britain, bathroom, washroom, restroom. And that's hugely degrading, particularly for women and girls. But it's still a subject that we can't talk about. And we have to begin talking about it in order to make a difference.
Is this primarily in third world countries, or is it in developing countries? Can you elaborate a little bit?
It's in developing countries. Yes, most of the industrialized world is toileted. And so we're talking about the countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, both rural areas and the rapidly urbanizing centers,
sure,
towns and cities, which are my particular interest and focus.
Sure.
Because probably by the middle of this century we're going to have a third of the world's population living in poor settlements in the developing world. So poor urban settlements so slums.
So it's a huge crisis, obviously. It's
a huge crisis, and it's affecting people's health. But it's not only affecting people's health, it's affecting people's dignity.
Sad.
To be, if you have nowhere to go, well, I just give the example of at least 200 million women in India.
Wow.
Don't have a toilet to go to. So and because of culture and society, they are not allowed to be seen going to defecate. And in Indian culture, they use water to clean themselves afterwards, and therefore it is obvious what they're doing.
Wow.
So 200 million women are obliged to hold themselves in until nightfall, when they can go and find somewhere where somebody else has already been to relieve themselves. And it's a scandal.
It's tragic.
Which we have to do something about, and more importantly, the governments of the developing countries have to do something about.
Okay. Well, we know that sanitation is always lagging behind compared to water supply.
Yeah.
What do you think are the main reasons people neglect sanitation?
I sincerely think it's because we don't talk about it, and we don't want to talk about it, and we don't want to think about it. And perhaps the other reason is that engineers find water easier. It is technically easier, although the technology of poor sanitation and improving sanitation is not difficult. It's all about people's behavior and helping them to find ways of improving their own situation. Engineers are the guys who are, and it is mostly men, who are still responsible for water and sanitation, and we're not trained in working with people. We're trained in working with things.
Sure.
And therefore very challenged by thinking about human behavior. But engineers can change themselves, and we have to, and we are, and we're working with a wider range of disciplines. Behavior change people. I've just been in a meeting here with folk from a very wide range of professions.
Sure.
And we can collaborate, and we need to, and we need to do more.
Sure. Well, the urban sanitation problem is often presented as a potential time bomb.
Yeah.
What are your views on how we may tackle this problem? You've said that sewers are not the answer. What does that mean?
Sewers are not the answer because there is not enough water to make them operate effectively. There is not the resource, the money to build them and then to manage them. We found this solution in the 19th century in London and then New York and Chicago and Boston and so on. And that's spread around the industrialized world. I think there are more and more people who are aware that it's completely ridiculous to be using potable quality water to flush our toilets. I mean, it's completely absurd.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And then to put it back into the source of somebody else's potable water. But that's what we're stuck with, and gradually that will change in the next 200 years maybe. But the great need is, as you rightly say, in the poorer urban areas where sewers are simply not going to be the answer. What we need is a method of containing excreta, which and then managing that excreta in such a way that it doesn't contaminate somebody else's environment. The major issue is public health, but that is not the driver for making people change their behavior, and therefore to put their own efforts and resources into the facilities which are necessary. So it's got to be a collaboration between civil society, as we now call it, human beings, families, households, communities, and local government. Local government has to be involved because it is a public health issue, and we need to facilitate that collaboration. So historically, if we go back to the 19th century, in London, the middle-class households were buying water closets, toilets,
Sure.
the things that we now use all over the world, all over the industrialized world. Huge amounts of water were being flushed into the River Thames, creating the Great Stink, as it was called at the time, which, because it happened to be next to the Houses of Parliament, motivated the members of Parliament to pass an act which facilitated the construction of sewers.
Quite quickly.
Very rapidly. It was amazing. It was extraordinary. It was the sanitary revolution of the 19th century. But it's not the way that it's going to happen in the developing world.
Sure.
And yet there are very good data which show that the benefit of improving sanitation hugely outweighs the cost.
Sure.
And yet politicians are not doing this. Is it because they don't understand it? Is it because they simply have other priorities? I don't know. Clearly this is a rhetorical question, but I don't have the answer. It is clearly something that we have to think very seriously about. But it comes back to your original question, which is about, we don't actually like talking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sorry to use the rude word shit in this interview. If you need to cut it, you will. But we have to be rude about this situation.
Yes.
It is absolutely scandalous, and we need to shock people into thinking more about it and working on it more
Basic human
effectively.
condition.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads me into the next question. Is there's a growing consensus that there are huge opportunities for green growth with respect to sanitation and fecal sludge management.
Yep.
People are already talking about dollars embedded in feces. Can you share your views on some of this?
I think that there is a huge opportunity there, but it's a delicate one. Going back to the 19th century, and I just think studying history is very useful.
Yes.
Because it became economically non-viable to actually turn fecal waste into a resource for agriculture in Britain. The cities were growing too big,
Sure.
so it was too far
Sure.
to transport it, and it just was no longer viable and didn't happen anymore. There were huge arguments about it. Many people saying it's absolutely mad that we're wasting this resource. But I think the other issue that we have to bear in mind is the social one of, related to our taboo subject, that we just don't like the idea of our food being grown with human waste.
We'll do it with,
We'll do it with
cows.
animal waste.
Yeah.
Easy, no problem. And we'll handle
Yeah.
pig waste, pig manure, cow manure, and so on. We will not handle, and we'll handle our own and our babies' waste. But again, I was talking in our meeting a few minutes ago about, maybe you'll handle your wife's waste, but you won't handle your neighbour's waste, and you don't want it anywhere near you.
Unless you're paid, maybe like an RN.
Unless you're paid,
or
and
someone
people
in that
are paid a lot to handle other
Or
people's
septic-
waste.
septic,
Even in the slums of Africa,
Sure.
it's a good business to be in.
Sure.
But who wants to be in it? And
Unless there's money to be
unless there's really good money,
Exactly.
and that's what happens. So it's a huge struggle. I think there is a resource, and it must be made better use of. But the social challenges and the economic challenges are great.
Well, if we could turn back the clock, what would you do differently with respect to increasing the access to sanitation, particularly in developing countries?
I think we have to we have to now rethink the sewer answer, the answer that sewers is the solution to everybody's problem.
Obviously not.
And so if I was going back to the 19th century, then I would be trying to make the argument of waste as a resource much more persuasive. But I don't know how. That clearly we're not living in those 150-year-old contexts. So I think we'd be trying to get away from the sewer, trying to think through how to manage fecal waste. You used the term fecal sludge, and it's very clear that the technical solution to poor urban areas is to contain it.
Sure.
But once it's been contained, we've got to do something with it. So we've got to find technical solutions which handle this in a decent way, a dignified way.
Sure.
We found reasonably dignified ways of handling our solid waste, our refuse, our garbage. We employ people to handle it, and then to recycle it, a lot of it, not as
Burn it, yes.
or incinerate it
Yes,
or
for
whatever.
energy, yes.
But we haven't solved that in terms of our feces.
Obviously not.
It's big. It's a big problem, and it's a very difficult problem.
Obviously.
So, I clearly don't claim to have any solutions. As I say to my students that I've been teaching now for 15 years in different countries, all I can do is raise more questions and get people to think about it. I don't attempt to have answers.
Sure.
My brain is small.